Pentax, Pentax, Pentax. It's time for film. Hello, Pentax Tips here. We are quite pleased today to bring you a Pentax 17 overview training video. The Pentax 17 is quite an exceptional camera. That's because the current year is 2024, and the Pentax 17 is a film camera. It has been about 20 years since a major camera company released a film camera. The Pentax 17 builds off an impressive history of film camera innovations, and the 17 fits right in for this modern age analog renaissance. Pentax had announced they were working on a return to film camera production, with their film camera project announcements and storylines, which I'll link below. Let's get right into it. The Pentax 17 is designed to be an entry-level compact film camera. This means that there's rather basic features, such as the Pentax 17 having a max shutter speed of only 1/350th of a second down to a 4-second exposure, and there's no self-timer. This compact form factor means there's no pentaprism or quick return mirror, but a separate lens to frame your scene from the one used to take your photos. The 17 by 24mm vertical portrait orientation fits 2 shots into the same space as a regular 35mm frame film roll. Best part of the half frame is that you get double the amount of shots out of your film roll. So a 24 frame becomes a 48, and a 36 frame becomes a 72 frame roll. In case it's not obvious, you can still shoot landscape orientation if you just rotate the camera. Throughout this video, I will be displaying some images taken with the Pentax 17. For black and white images, I developed at home using Blazenol Developer and Ilford Stop and Fixer. For color images, I sent the film rolls off for professional development. For all rolls, I scanned the images with my DSLR using a technique similar to this linked video. However, to reverse the negatives into a positive image, this time I used a Lightroom plugin called Negative Lab Pro. This workflow is extremely simple, and the results are so impressive. Simply scan your images, use your white balance manual selector dropper tool to sample the white space around your negative. This will adjust your white balance settings accordingly to the light source you used. Next, simply press Ctrl-Alt-N, and this will bring up the plugin. You can select your source scan method, I used a digital camera, and then convert the negative. You can fully edit your images within this pop-up dialog. Incredible, impressive results. It's an outstanding program, and I highly recommend it. We're going to cover all aspects of the Pentax 17. Please see the timestamps to jump to specific topics. Starting with the front of the camera, at the top side here is the prominent Pentax branding, and right next to that is the model name 17. On the other side, we have a built-in flash lamp. Right in the middle is our vertical portrait viewfinder. The lens cap is absolutely tiny at 40.5mm. I've got a 82mm, 67mm, and a 49mm cap here for comparison. The fixed lens is a 25mm f3.5, and although the name includes the word traditional, the lens is equipped with Pentax's latest HD lens coatings. This 25mm focal length in half-frame format gives us a 35mm equivalency of 37mm, which is considered a wide-angle lens. And this is an excellent and versatile focal length, suitable for everything down to macro work all the way up to landscape photography. However, there isn't much zoom power, so you might struggle with wildlife photography or getting closer up to those action shots. HF stands for half frame. Of course, this lens only covers the image circle necessary for a 17 by 24 format. There is a little sensor embedded at the top of the main lens, which is a light meter sensor. This light meter placement allows for correct metering, even when using filters such as neutral density or polarizer filters. It'll meter through whatever is in front of it, and that's pretty awesome. In my opinion, a clear UV filter is recommended for the Pentax 17. As when the lens focuses, the lens elements move forward and back, potentially allowing dust in the lens housing. This is our zone focusing selector ring. There are 3 markings, all indicating the same focus distance. On the top, we have that icon shorthand, and on the bottom, we have the focus distances in meters, and again on the other side in feet. We'll cover more about these focus zones in a later section. Should also know that your currently selected focus zone is being reflected into your viewfinder for quick reference. There are 3 strap eyelets on the Pentax 17. The camera comes supplied with a simple wrist strap that's attached to an eyelet by passing the string loop through the eyelet and then passing the end of the strap through the string loop. If you're using your own neck strap, you can attach the strap for either horizontal or vertical carry. On the side of the camera is a substantial grip, which also houses the camera battery. To open the battery chamber, use a coin to loosen the screw on the side of the grip. You'll see the door is connected with a hinge-style retainer along the side. The Pentax 17 takes a single 3-volt CR2 lithium battery, which is relatively cheap and commonly available. Insert the battery with the positive pole facing down, then reattach the grip and tighten the screw back down. Make sure you use a fresh battery in the 17, as without a charge the film lever won't advance and the shutter will not fire. For the back of the camera, we have our viewfinder with a little embedded Pentax branding, and here is our film back door. On the door, we have a classic film reminder holder. And last, for the back of the camera, we have a cable switch terminal, SC205 cable switch, and it's used to remotely trigger your shutter with a cable rather than touching the shutter button, which could otherwise cause shake and blur in your images. And this isn't a new accessory. This is the same cable switch released way back in the year 2000 with the first Pentax DSLRs. So it's relatively common and available on the secondhand market. On the bottom of the camera, we have our standard tripod screw mount, our film rewind release button, and here is our camera's unique serial number. On the top of the camera, starting on the left, we have a film rewind mechanism. We can flip open the winder that's stored away in the center, and we can see an arrow indicating which way to rotate the crank to rewind our film into the canister. Pulling up on the crank 2 positions will release the film back door. Nested below the film rewind crank is a large ring that displays our manual ISO selection, which is locked in place until we press the release button right to the side of the ISO ring. Choose your selection by lining up the ISO to the black indicator line at the bottom. We can choose from ISO 50 up to 3200. Just for reference, ISO 125, 160, 400, and 1600 are simply displayed as dots between the other written stops. Next up, we have our exposure compensation dial. Here we can select for up to 2 stops of exposure compensation in either direction in 3rd stop increments. So if you feel your shots could benefit from being slightly brighter or darker, either for backlit situations or creative touches, you can dial that adjustment in with this dial. However, remember to reset the exposure compensation for your next shot. At the top middle here, we have another Pentax branding along with some beautiful nostalgia. This is the original Pentax parent company called Asahi Optical Company, which is an excellent thing to see on a film camera throwback. This is absolutely badass. This little marker here indicates the film plane, and this may interest people who are really familiar with macro photography and want to measure their distance to their subject. Next, we have the main dial. I'll cover this more extensively in a later section. Here we have our shutter button, half press to focus, full press to take your shot. Located under the shutter button is a power switch. To turn the camera on, toggle to the right. To turn the camera off, toggle to the left. There's a little red dot indicating the current position as well. If you don't touch the camera, it'll go to sleep after a minute. To wake it back up, you just half press the shutter. The film advance lever is exceptionally appreciated on this camera. It's a small thing, but it really adds a lot of pleasure to the photo taking experience. We have a comfortable 35-degree angle standoff position and a healthy 135-degree full throw. Last up on the right side here, we have a frame counter indicated by this black line here. Again, the total frames will be twice the number of the suggested amount on the film roll. However, this counter goes up to a maximum of 72 frames. Loading film into the Pentax 17 is extremely simple. First, ensure your ISO is set to that of the film speed that you're going to load. But next up, put your top dial into P and ensure the lens cap is attached to the camera. This is to avoid using the flash or taking unnecessarily long exposures. Open the rewind crank and lift up the knob until the rear door opens. Insert your film canister on the left side, press the rewind knob back down into the film canister, and slightly pull the leader across the film guide rails. Align the leader with this orange film end indicator. Ensure the film keeps flat and slowly shut the back door. Now turn the camera on and advance the film. You should see the rewind crank rotate counterclockwise to know that your film is loaded correctly. Release the shutter and advance the film again, repeating until the frame counter reads 0. Make sure to rip off a flap from the film box and slide that into your film reminder holder. The zone focusing should be selected based on our distance to your subject. There are 6 zones to choose from. The mountain icon is the far distance zone, and it ranges from 5.1 meters to infinity. The family icon is the medium distance zone, and it ranges from 2.1 meters to 5.3 meters. The 2-person icon is called close distance zone, and it is from 1.4 meters to 2.2 meters. The single person icon is the extremely close distance zone, which ranges from 1 meter to 1.4 meters. The fork and knife icon, it's also called a close-up zone for tabletop photography, ranges from 47 centimeters to 54 centimeters. The flower icon, called the close-up or macro zone, ranges from 24 centimeters to 26 centimeters. You also might ask, I want to quickly and easily take macro shots. How the hell am I supposed to guess where that 2 centimeter plane of focus is? And the answer is simple. The lanyard provides a length that measures 25 centimeters away from the focal plane. Brilliant idea, Pentax. The mnemonic I used to memorize the distance scales was macro was the distance of the lanyard, tabletop is a half meter, 1 person is about 1 meter, 2 people is about 2 meters, and guess what? 3 people is about 3 meters away. Anything beyond that will be the landscape focus zone. So when you want to shoot something, evaluate the focus distance. Set the focus distance ring and half press the shutter. This will activate the motor and focus the lens into position. Quick note here, while half pressing and focusing the lens, you will not be able to select a different focus zone with the ring. You will need to release the shutter before selecting a new focus zone. The current setting on the main dial is indicated by this white line, and there are 7 settings on the main dial, broken down into 2 halves. The white options are all without flash, and the yellow is all with flash. There's also blue, which is full auto settings. This setting is mostly used when you don't have time or you don't want to fiddle around with the controls. That's because auto selects a pan focus mechanism. That means the 17 will attempt to acquire everything in focus down from 1 meter away all the way to infinity. That's right, the zone focus selector ring does not operate in this mode. You may recall that the Pentax 17 has a minimum focusing distance of 25 centimeters, but in order to achieve pan focus with such a great distance of acceptable focus, the minimum focusing distance in auto mode is bumped up to 1 meter. So remember, auto mode should not be used for tabletop shots or macro photography. This mode will also decide when to use the flash. All other modes will either be entirely on or entirely off with each shot. Next up is P, which stands for program. This should be considered your standard mode, especially in daylight photography. This mode is exactly like full auto, but it will allow you to choose your own focus setting, which for me is a lot more fun than letting the camera do all the work. And it also allows for some subject isolation, which adds a lot more character and wonder to your images. Also, the flash will stay off no matter what. But if you choose to use P but also want the flash to fire, there is of course a separate setting called P flash. For reference, the max flash sync is 1/30th of a second, so if you use flash in very bright conditions, you may blow out your highlights. If you think you want to shoot in bright conditions outdoors with a flash to help illuminate your subject, be sure to load your camera with very slow ISO film to compensate for those very bright conditions. Here we can see a comparison of the same scene, shooting indoors, with and without a flash, and again outdoors, shooting with and without a flash. Next, here we have a setting that looks like a crescent moon. It's called Slow Speed Program. This tells your camera that you're in low light situations and you want to expose as much for the shadows without wrecking the highlights. Perfect for twilight photography at dawn and dusk. This mode does not fire a flash, but if you choose, there's a slow speed sync with flash setting. The slow speed sync with flash would be used in these low light situations where you have a prominent subject in your frame. The subject in the foreground would be lit by the flash, and the background will be exposed using that slow shutter speed desirable for those twilight conditions. Next setting is called bokeh, which tells your camera you want to emphasize subject isolation, which will tell your camera that it wants to use the largest available aperture, allowing your image to blur the background and create beautiful portraits. Quick note here, to open your aperture as much as possible, you'll want to use as low of an ISO film as possible, or shoot in lower light conditions. Last up here is bulb mode, which is used in long exposure photography, such as shooting light traces and fireworks. This setting keeps the shutter button open for however long you have the shutter button pressed down. Point of note here is that the lens will stay wide open at f3.5 for all bulb shots. Because we are exposing for such a long period of time in this mode, it is definitely recommended to use the optional cable switch when shooting bulb shots. Let's talk about what you'll see in this beautiful bright viewfinder. Looking through, there are two rectangle framing indicators. The larger outside rectangle is the entire frame of your shot. The outside peripheral of this box is not part of your shot. It's viewable just to let the photographer have a greater sense of their surroundings and may assist with framing. The smaller rectangle at the bottom is called the close-up field compensation frame and should be used to frame your scenes when shooting macro or tabletop photos. Along the bottom, in the middle, shows our currently selected zone focus ring selection. There are indicator lamps in the viewfinder on the right-hand side. The top one is orange and is the flash indicator. If it's blinking slowly, that means the flash is charging and it will remain lit when the flash is ready to use. The bottom one is blue and is a general warning indicator. If you see both these lights are blinking alternatively, that means the film isn't advancing properly. Either the end of the roll not loaded right, or it has no film at all. If you see the blue indicator blinking fast, it's your exposure warning. It means you have exceptionally low light conditions, and you may want to either consider using a flash, selecting bulb to do a long exposure, or you might have to check to see if you have the lens cap attached to the lens. If the blue indicator is blinking slowly, that means you're focusing on something very close up for tabletop or macro photography. This reminds you to frame your scene using the close-up visual field compensation frame. First, if you're new to photography, you might want to watch our Photography 101 video on the basics of photography, with the exposure triangle linked here. Here's the way I suggest you take your photos. First, remove the lens cap. Also, be sure that your ISO is set to that of the film speed loaded in your camera. Turn your camera on and turn the mode dial to an appropriate setting. Select a focus zone for your subject distance. Look through the viewfinder and frame your scene. Be sure to check the LEDs for any potential warnings. Half press to set your focus, and a full press to release the shutter. Be sure to advance your film for that next shot. When you get to the end of your film roll, you'll feel tension on the film advance lever, and your frame counter should read the correct number of frames. Flip the camera over and press the rewind button on the bottom of your camera. Open the rewind crank and rewind in the direction of the arrow on the top of the knob. You're done rewinding when you feel the tension release and the film is wound back into the canister. Now you can lift that rewind knob to a position where it sits comfortably and then up one more position to pop open that back door. You can now retrieve your film roll, ready for development, and you'll notice that the frame counter automatically resets, ready for that next roll. Thanks for watching this overview training of the Pentax 17. If you like this content and want to see more like it, please like and subscribe. Thanks.